Let's talk about request response flow in Symfony framework. What I want you to realize is how this concept is very simple and how we can use that information to our advantage. In just a moment, I'd like to show you a few key parts for this request response flow, which I believe are very significant, and hopefully you can remember them. Often, you're going to find yourself in a situation when you write a lot of code, but with that extra knowledge, you may choose a different approach, a different strategy. Eventually, this decision making can save you a lot of time in the long term. Before we go into the code, let me break down the request response flow into 3 stages. First stage is to make an HTTP request. It can be as simple as opening a browser. So you open a browser and you make an HTTP request. In a second stage, that request you've just made ends up on the server and is directed into Index.php file. Index.php acts as a front-end controller, which means no matter what request information it contains, it will always go through that one file, one central place. In the final stage, inside the Index.php, we can now initialize Symfony kernel. Symfony kernel will handle your request and immediately will return the response. All we need to do is to render that response to the user. That's all it is. Everything will make sense once you look at the code with me. I hope you find this video very useful. Let's begin. I'm going to create a brand new project using Symfony CLI. This is the most basic version of Symfony framework. I'm going to wait until files are loaded. And we can see there's not even a single controller, which means if I render this page, we see pretty much nothing. My task is to create index controller. And we'll create one method to render some content for us. Say index will return response. Return new response. And we say hello to the user. We need to register that root using root attributes, and we'll say hello for the hello root. We'll render hello content. And let me start the server, Symfony server start. And I'll show you quickly, when I refresh this page, we render this text hello. Okay, so we know Symfony framework is used in this project. We know it's working correctly. And I'm going to move to more interesting part, which is Index.php. This is related to the request response flow I was mentioning earlier. And as you can see, when every request comes in here, there's some logic to initialize that kernel for Symfony, and then there's some extra information and runtime for Symfony to render that properly. Okay, so the task here is going to be recreate that framework, recreate the Symfony steps. Now I'm going to take the request. So first stage is obviously taking the request. I'm going to create a request object with populated information about the request. And we know we need a kernel, Symfony kernel. So we say Symfony kernel will stick to dev environment for now, and the second parameter is about debugging. So let's say it's a true for now. What we know, the kernel needs to handle the request, and we know also the response is returned immediately. There's a final step is to render this response to the user, so because everything is assigned to a variable. Now these 4 lines of code will match exactly the same what Symfony is providing us. with this line of code and autoload runtime. And most of the time, when you initialize brand new project via Composer, you're going to be using autoload. So I'm going to use the default autoload. I'm taking the request. We initialize the Symfony kernel. We're handling that request, and we are returning response as well as render the whole content to the user. And let's see if that works. And before we do that, I'm going to modify something in the controller just to see if the content for the browser is the same. I'm going to refresh this page and we see a new content right there. Okay, that's great. As you can see, 4 lines of code is recreating the Symfony flow, the request response flow. Now, let's take this a little bit further. What I want you to see here is that we can replace the middle part where we let the Symfony render the response. We'll replace that with our own logic. I'm going to handle my request. First of all, I want to expect a response. So I'm going to use match expression where we take information from the request, and the information we choose is going to be get path info. So what the path is going to be used by the request, we want to match that in this expression. So I'm going to say when we match a hello, we want to say new response. We want to return response. So hello. Here we say when we have any other case, we want to return new response with a content 404, and we'll match the headers to be 404s. Okay, so now we have this response back. We can now render it to the user by just calling a send method. And let's see, I'm going to refresh the content of this page, and we say hello here. If I render anything else, I see 404 content. As you can see, this is a really good example how we can handle and take information from the request and use our own logic to handle the response, which at the end we want to render to the user. I would say even this is more of a little framework that we just created, and this is going to be more applicable for maybe internal applications where they talk to each other and do very small things. But for most of the time, you want to keep Symfony as it is. However, in this case, you only just need HTTP Foundation component to be able to populate the request object, and we use that. We extract some information about the request, and we return the response, which we then render it to the user. Very simple application, but I hope you can learn something from this. So thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.